History is written by the victors. But what happens to the women who should have won? Every era had them, brilliant, powerful, dangerous women who were erased, imprisoned, forgotten, or deliberately written out of the story. Welcome to History Roadshow. These are their stories. Imagine you are the rightful ruler of England. Your father was the king. He named you his heir. The most powerful men in the land knelt before you and swore on holy relics that the throne was yours. And then, the moment your father drew his last breath, they gave it to someone else. Not because you were incompetent, not because you had done anything wrong, but simply because you were a woman. This is the story of Empress Matilda, a woman who was the daughter of a king, the widow of an emperor, and the mother of a dynasty. A woman who fought for 19 brutal years to claim what was rightfully hers. A woman who came agonisingly close to becoming England's first queen and was denied at the very last moment. To understand what was done to Matilda and why it mattered so profoundly, you have to understand the world she was born into. In February of 1102, a daughter arrived at the Palace of Westminster. Her father was Henry I, King of England and ruler of Normandy. Her mother was Matilda of Scotland, a woman known for her piety, intelligence, and formidable dignity. The child was named after her mother, as was the custom, and from her earliest years, it was clear that she had inherited the best of both parents: her father's sharp political mind and her mother's composure under pressure. She was not supposed to be the heir. She had a brother, William Adelin, a healthy, legitimate and trained heir to the English throne. Matilda's path, like that of every royal daughter of her era, was expected to lead not to a crown, but to a marriage. A strategic one, to be sure, a prestigious one, certainly, but a marriage nonetheless. And so, at the age of 8, Matilda was sent to Germany. She was to be betrothed to Henry V, King of Germany and Holy Roman Emperor, the most powerful ruler in all of Europe. Most children of 8 are still learning their letters. Matilda was being prepared to rule an empire. She was tutored in German, absorbed the customs of a foreign court, and adapted to a world entirely unlike the one she had left, with what contemporaries described as remarkable ease. She learned to carry herself like an empress before she had even reached adolescence, because that, increasingly, was exactly what she was being asked to become. In 1114, when Matilda was 12, she and Henry V were formally married. In 1117, she travelled with him to Rome, and in St. Peter's Basilica, the most sacred building in Christendom, she was controversially crowned empress. She was 15 years old. She acted as imperial regent in Italy when her husband was called elsewhere. She governed, she issued charters, she held audiences. She was not decorative. She was the real thing. For 15 years, Matilda ruled at Henry V's side. She acquired an education in power that was, by any measure, extraordinary. She understood courts, councils, diplomacy, and the careful management of men who believed themselves her superiors. When Henry V died in 1125, leaving no children and no heir, Matilda was widowed at the age of 23. She returned to England. And England, as it turned out, was about to need her very badly indeed. In November of 1120, while Matilda had been building her life in Germany, catastrophe had arrived at the English court. A ship called the White Ship set sail from Normandy, bound for England, carrying among its passengers William Adelin, King Henry's only legitimate son and the future of the English throne. The ship struck a rock in the darkness. It sank within minutes. William drowned. Nearly 300 others drowned with him. King Henry I, the chroniclers tell us, never smiled again. With his son gone, Henry had no legitimate male heir. He had an enormous number of illegitimate children. Historians have counted as many as 20. But in the feudal world of 12th century England, legitimacy was everything. And his only legitimate child was a daughter. A daughter who had spent 15 years learning how to run an empire. A daughter who was, by any objective measure, better prepared to rule than most of the men who surrounded her. In 1126, Henry did something unprecedented. He summoned his most powerful barons and bishops and demanded they swear a solemn oath on holy relics to recognize Matilda as his rightful successor. They knelt. They swore. Among those who placed their hands on those relics and pledged their loyalty to Matilda was a man named Stephen of Blois. He was Henry's nephew. He was Matilda's cousin. He was one of the most powerful magnates in the kingdom. He would remember that oath very selectively. Henry made one more decision that would define the rest of Matilda's life. He arranged a second marriage for her, not to an emperor this time, but to Geoffrey of Anjou, Count of Anjou, a young man 11 years her junior. It was a strategic match, designed to secure continental alliances, but it was deeply unpopular with the English barons, who regarded the Angevins as rivals rather than allies. Matilda herself was not consulted. She was furious. She did not attempt to hide it, but she obeyed. In time, the marriage produced 3 sons. The youngest of the 3 would one day change the course of English history, but we are not there yet. In December of 1135, Henry I died in Normandy, reportedly after eating a dish of lampreys that his physicians had expressly told him to avoid. With his death, the oath his barons had sworn was supposed to activate. Matilda was pregnant with her 3rd child and could not travel quickly enough to England to press her claim. And in those few, narrow, decisive weeks, the man who had knelt and sworn and pledged looked at the situation and made his calculation. Stephen of Blois rode to England. He rode directly to Winchester, where the royal treasury was held. He seized the treasury. He had himself crowned King of England at Westminster Abbey before Matilda could do a single thing to stop it. The justification he offered was breathtaking in its audacity. Stephen claimed that Henry I had changed his mind on his deathbed, that the old king had, in his final moments, named Stephen as his true successor rather than his daughter. There were no witnesses to this supposed change of heart. There was no written record. There was only the word of the man who stood to benefit most from the claim being believed. The barons who had knelt and sworn largely looked the other way. The reasons were various. Some genuinely believed a woman could not rule. Some distrusted Geoffrey of Anjou and had no desire to be governed by an Angevin. Some simply saw Stephen as an easier master and made their peace with that. The church, in the person of the Bishop of Winchester, who happened to be Stephen's own brother, confirmed the coronation. Matilda was informed of what had been done to her. The word furious does not begin to cover it. But she was also, in that moment, thousands of miles away, heavily pregnant, and without an army. She bided her time. She would not bide it for long. What followed became known as the Anarchy. It was 19 years of civil war that split England down the middle, pitting the forces of a woman who had been robbed against a king who had done the robbing. The chroniclers of the period were not subtle about what it meant for the people caught between them. They described it as a time when God and his saints seemed to be sleeping. Villages burned, harvests failed. The normal structures of justice and administration collapsed entirely in many parts of the country. It was not a clean war. It was not a chivalric war. It was a grinding, brutal, attritional conflict in which neither side could deliver a knockout blow, and neither side was willing to stop. In 1139, Matilda landed in England. She had powerful allies: her uncle, King David I of Scotland, who invaded the north in her name, and, crucially, her illegitimate half-brother Robert, Earl of Gloucester, one of the wealthiest and most capable military commanders in the kingdom. It was Robert who led her armies, who held her stronghold in the West Country, and who kept her cause alive through its darkest moments. Without him, Matilda's bid for the throne almost certainly collapses in its first year. With him, it becomes something much more serious. The war swung back and forth. Castles changed hands. Allegiances shifted with the wind. And then, in February of 1141, something happened that the entire country had believed impossible. At the Battle of Lincoln, Matilda's forces captured King Stephen himself. The man who had stolen her throne, who had ridden to Winchester and seized what was not his, was now her prisoner. He was taken to Bristol Castle and locked in a cell. For the first time since her father's death, the crown of England was within Matilda's reach. A church council was convened. It declared her the rightful ruler of England. She was proclaimed Lady of the English, one step, one ceremony, one crown away from being exactly what she had always been. She moved toward London for her coronation. She entered the city. She sat down to her coronation banquet. She was so close. And then she made a mistake. Entering London in the full flush of triumph, Matilda demanded immediate and heavy taxation from a city whose population was already exhausted by years of war. She refused to grant the concessions that tradition required of a new monarch. She was imperious, she was unyielding, and perhaps understandably, given everything she had survived to reach that room, she was not in a mood to bargain. The Londoners had not forgotten that Stephen's wife and his cause still had considerable support within the city walls. The church bells began to ring, not in celebration, as a signal. A mob descended on Westminster. Matilda, who had spent 19 years fighting for the right to sit in that hall, was forced to flee it on horseback, her coronation abandoned before it had begun. It was the closest she would ever come, and she knew it. The war continued. Stephen was released from captivity, the price for the return of Robert of Gloucester, who had been captured in the chaos of the months that followed the fall of London. The stalemate resumed, and by the autumn of 1142, Matilda found herself in the most dangerous position of the entire war. Stephen's forces had surrounded Oxford Castle. He had led the assault himself. The contemporary chronicler, known as the Gesta Stephani, describes his army swimming across the river approaches to take the city, the king himself leading the charge through the freezing water. Matilda's small force retreated into the castle. Stephen controlled the city. He knew he could not take the castle by storm. Its tower was described as of great height, and its walls were formidable. So he settled in for a siege. He would wait. For 3 months, he waited. Inside Oxford Castle, food ran out. The garrison weakened. Surrender became not a question of whether, but of when. Stephen's men kept watch. The only question was, what kind of capture awaited her when she finally emerged? Matilda had one more answer they were not expecting. On a December night in 1142, with snow thick on the ground and the River Thames frozen solid, Empress Matilda was lowered from the walls of Oxford Castle. The chroniclers differ on the precise method. Some say ropes, some say a postern gate opened in the dark. But on what happened next, they agree entirely. She was dressed in white. The historian Henry of Huntingdon wrote that she fled across the frozen Thames, clothed in white garments that reflected the snow, deceiving the eyes of the besiegers. She moved through Stephen's camps. She crossed the river on foot, the ice holding beneath her. She walked 6 miles through the bitter dark to the town of Abingdon, and she was not caught. The Gesta Stephani, a chronicle written by someone who was not on her side, called what she did a wondrous fashion of escape. William of Malmesbury, the most respected historian of the age, called it a manifest miracle of God. She reached safety at Wallingford Castle. The garrison at Oxford, no longer protecting anyone, surrendered the following day. Stephen, deprived of his quarry, agreed to easy terms with the remaining defenders. He had the city. He did not have her. The war ground on for 12 more years. Matilda never stopped fighting. She never renounced her claim. But as the years passed, and as her own health began to suffer, she gradually transferred the weight of her ambition to the son she had been raising since his birth for exactly this moment. His name was Henry. He was red-haired, fierce, and utterly determined. He was 19 years old when he landed in England in 1153 with an army at his back. Stephen, exhausted, recently bereaved, his own son dead before him, agreed to the Treaty of Wallingford. He would remain king for his lifetime, but the throne, upon his death, would pass to Henry. Stephen died in October 1154. He had been king for 19 years, every single one of them contested. Henry was crowned King Henry II of England. He was the first of the Plantagenet kings, the dynasty that would rule England for the next 3 centuries, producing among its number Richard the Lionheart, Edward I, Edward III, and Henry V, who won at Agincourt. Matilda had won, not the crown she had earned, but something that would outlast every crown in Europe. Matilda spent her final years in Normandy, and they were not the years of a woman in retreat. Letters survive, real letters, in her own hand or dictated by her, that show her son Henry consulting her on matters of governance, deferring to her judgment, seeking her counsel on the most complex questions of the kingdom she had fought to give him. She was his advisor, his conscience, and in several documented instances, his restraining hand when his temper threatened to undo his politics. She founded hospitals, she endowed monasteries, she arbitrated disputes and corresponded with popes. She was, in her final decades, what she had always been. A woman of formidable intelligence, doing the work that needed to be done, quietly, without ceremony, without a crown. She died in September 1167, at the age of 65. For the medieval period, this was a remarkable age, reached by very few, and by almost no one who had lived the kind of life she had. Her epitaph was written at her own instruction. It read, "Here lies the daughter, wife, and mother of Henry." 3 Henrys, 3 kings across 3 generations. And at the center of all of them, the thread that connected everything, Matilda. The daughter who should have inherited, the mother who made sure her son did, the woman who refused, for 19 years and then some, to accept that what had been taken from her was gone forever. She was never crowned Queen of England. England would not see a crowned queen regnant for another 400 years, when Mary Tudor finally took the throne in 1553. And even Mary's path was made possible in part by the precedent Matilda had spent her life establishing, that a woman could fight for a throne, hold it, lose it, and still change the course of history. History forgot her. History was wrong. She was the daughter of a king, the widow of an emperor, The woman who crossed a frozen river in the dark, wrapped in white, with nothing behind her but a ruined siege, and nothing ahead of her but 6 miles of snow and the possibility of capture. She did it anyway. The chroniclers who opposed her, men who had every reason to dismiss her, could not bring themselves to tell her story without a note of something approaching awe. Even her enemies recognized what she was. They just refused to let her be it. What strikes me every time I return to Matilda's story is the question of what England might have looked like had those barons honoured their oath. Had Stephen stayed on his knees? Had one single person in that room in 1135 done what they swore to do? We will never know. But we know what Matilda did with the hand she was dealt. And that, I think, is more than enough. If Matilda's story has stayed with you, and I think it will, I'd love to know which moment of it struck you hardest. Was it the betrayal? The coronation banquet? The escape across the ice? Leave me your answer in the comments. Every response genuinely shapes what this series covers next. And if you haven't yet subscribed to History Roadshow, now is the moment. Because the women whose stories we are telling in this series are waiting, and Empress Matilda is only the beginning. I'll see you in the next one.